last year. Capital City rents rose by 13.6% in a year, or about $75, driven by particularly sharp rises in Sydney, Melbourne and Perth.
Shocking, not surprising, but diabolical.
Emma Greenhalgh is from National Shelter, which advocates for the housing needs of low-income households.
I think what we're seeing is a market that's running away. It's completely unsustainable, for people to be trying to live within this housing market, and it's detrimental, to people's health and well-being.
In the ACT, the rent increase over the past quarter was just 1.6%, and annually it was stable. Ms Greenhalgh believes it's worth investigating whether Canberra's laws restricting rent increases to no more than CPI plus 10% are having an impact.
Given that the ACT is the only jurisdiction that has, let's call it, a rent fairness formula in their tenancy legislation, it's the only one when it comes to houses and these figures where there's a very low quarterly change and actually a negative annual change. So I think it'd be interesting to see how that goes on, in the next quarter.
Hobart was the only place where rents fell. They went down 1% in a year, or about $5 a week to $520. Ben Bartle is the principal solicitor for Tasmania's Tenants Union. He points out Tasmania's social housing waiting list is still growing despite the drop in rent prices.
It is possible that there is a peak in terms of where rents are at the moment, and that's just because wages aren't increasing at the same levels as rents, which means that people are simply not able to pay any more money for their rental properties.
And the PropTrack figures focus on median advertised rents. So if you're already in a rental, your experience might be different.
People who live in rental properties are continuing to get rent increases. So this data is only for advertised properties, not properties where renters are already living. So there do continue to be rent rises. It's just for those people already in rental properties, not those looking.
Ben Bartle from Tasmania's Tenants Union, ending that report by Alexandra Humphreys and Stephanie Smale. The Prime Minister has announced a major shift in Australia's manufacturing policy. It's called the Future Made in Australia Act and will mean more government support for industries such as clean energy, batteries and critical minerals. While some have welcomed the move, arguing it will give our country a chance at competing with the rest of the world, others are urging caution. Alison Shao reports. A third of Australian households are using solar panels, but there's just one company in the country making them.
So Tindo Solar is Australia's only solar panel manufacturer right now. It's been a challenging market for manufacturers in general, I think, in Australia, but in the renewable sector, that's a small space, and Tindo is really the only one holding the candle.
Tindo Solar's Chief Executive Richard Pedersen says it's an aggressive market with fierce global competition.
As you can imagine, if imported products coming at a lower price means it's harder to compete with that product if you're an Australian manufacturer.
Now the Australian government is stepping in by overhauling its manufacturing policy. Its Future Made in Australia Act, announced today, is designed to offer more support for local producers. It's an initiative Tindo and Richard Pedersen hope to capitalise on.
There's a great opportunity for businesses to, with the right support, scale to a level which will make us much more competitive on the global stage.
Speaking in Brisbane today, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says it marks a significant and urgent shift in industry policy. It'll be applying a more interventionist approach and funneling taxpayer money into sectors like clean energy, batteries and critical minerals.
Where government investment is required as a catalyst and to facilitate that private sector investment, then we should be prepared to engage in providing loans or providing support to make sure that those industries can get off the ground.
The Prime Minister says it's about allowing Australia to stand on its own 2 feet. Charles Parkinson is the founder and editor of RenewEconomy.com. He says without this plan, Australia risks being left behind.
What I think Albanese's speech recognises today is that there's a lot of competition competition. There's a lot of capital that wants to invest in this, but they're being attracted elsewhere because governments across the globe, and particularly in the US and in Europe, but also in North Asia, are doing similar things. They've already moved. They've provided incentives for manufacturers to set up in their countries and produce these new technologies. And I think there's a realisation that if Australia doesn't move, then it's going to be left out.
The government hopes the policy will better coordinate investment for projects like its $1 billion program for solar panel manufacturing, announced in recent weeks. Giles Parkinson says these initiatives are about safeguarding our access to renewable technology.
It's not because Australia thinks that it can beat China on cost, but it just thinks it's really important to have some sovereignty over their own supply chain.
More detail on the government's plan is expected in the federal budget in May, but Mr Parkinson says the industry wants action on a large scale.
There's no point before putting a little bit of money into it because you're not doing enough. That argument goes to, if you're going to do this, then do it properly and go big and go hard.
But there are concerns that Labor's policy goes against principles of the free market. Warren Hogan is Chief Economic Advisor at Judo Bank. He says the government needs to be careful in its approach.
Where the government, I think, is going to get itself into trouble is if it tries to actually get into the game of picking winners at an industry or even firm level. This can easily go wrong just as well as it can go right. And the government's got to be very careful that it makes sure that the framework is transparent, that the objectives are clear, and that it is facilitating the market economy and markets and private investment rather than them themselves entering into markets and trying to create outcomes. That's, I think, when they get themselves into trouble.
But he says the government may have no other choice but to intervene directly.
The reality is that there is intervention in this space occurring all across the world, and if we want to play a role, the government is recognising that we need to provide some sort of government support and the direction of resources in this area.
Mr Hogan says there are concerns about Australia's ability to compete with larger economies, but it's an important step to take.
While we have scale challenges in Australia, we also have a great opportunity being on the doorstep of the world's growth engine of South Asia.
He says Australia's industry policy in recent decades has been haphazard and fragmented, but this framework is promising a clear plan. Alison Shao. This is The World Today. Thanks for your company. There have been reports of a new wave of race-hate crimes in Russia following the country's most deadly terror attack in 20 years last month. 4 men of Central Asian descent have been charged over the mass shooting, but now others from minority groups in Russia say they're being subjected to increased discrimination. Europe correspondent Isabella Higgins had more. That's the sound of a group of young men verbally abusing a woman from a minority background at a train station in Moscow. After a number of expletives, they chant, "Russia is for Russians, Moscow is for Muscovites." The video then shows the young men doing a Nazi salute as they step onto the train carriage. It was shared on a social media page called Asians of Russia. Underneath are a mix of comments, some outrage, others making further racist remarks. The ABC has spoken to a man who wants to be referred to only by his nickname, Johnny. He's from Tajikistan in Central Asia and says in recent weeks he too has been harassed by strangers.
2 days ago, we were sitting in a gazebo with friends near our house, where people often pass by. And well, there was a woman, and she yelled at us, "Tajiks are sitting over there, terrorists."
This is happening in the aftermath of the deadly terror attack on the Crocus City Hall outside Moscow, where more than 140 people were killed last month. 4 men believed to be Islamic State militants from the Central Asian country of Tajikistan were arrested and charged over the incident. Following this attack, there's been a crackdown on foreigners and immigrants, with a reported 400 deported from the St. Petersburg region. Russian President Vladimir Putin told the nation a tough approach is needed to protect all communities.
We have every reason to believe that the main goal of those